So, lots of discussions still surrounding the losses declared by the Bank of Ghana, 60.8 billion. Now, this morning we're joined by Professor Elikplimi Agbloyor, who's an associate professor of finance at the University of Ghana, and Martin Kpebu in studio. Professor Agbloyor, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Winston. It's a pleasure to reconnect, and good morning to your defending expert.
Great. So let's get into the conversation. I mean, there's been lots of talk here and there. You hear people talking about negative equity, you hear people talking about losses. Just by way of clarification, does it really matter that the Bank of Ghana has made losses? How do these losses impact the mandate of the Bank of Ghana? Before we get into the other aspects of the conversation.
Yes. Okay. So maybe, first of all, I will start with how a loss can occur. So the central bank also has a balance sheet, which has assets and liabilities. The central bank earns income on the assets and pays interest on the liabilities.
Sure.
So, for example, if the interest cost exceeds the income, that could lead to a loss. Again, the central bank owns assets, and if the value of these assets fall, it could lead to a loss for the central bank because due to accounting requirements, sometimes you have to recognize the falling assets in your profit and loss. So these are the main reasons that account for a central bank making a loss.
Okay.
I guess the numbers are clear. They wrote off 32.3 billion on non-marketable securities, 15.1 billion on marketable securities, and 4.7 billion on their exposure to the cocoa board. They also made a 5.2 billion loss on price and exchange rate valuation effects, and 3.3 billion due to interest expenses on the cost of monetary policy operations. So that led to the overall loss of 60.8 billion. Now, directly to your question, does this matter? It's a cause for some concern, especially if losses occur frequently or year after year. But whether we should be alarmed, my answer will be no. This is not a cause for alarm.
Why isn't it a cause for alarm?
Particularly because central banks are a bit different from commercial banks. So if a central bank makes a loss, it does not necessarily mean that the central bank has been reckless. And losses and negative equity do not directly affect the ability of the central bank to effectively carry out its mandate in terms of monetary policy and achieving price stability and financial stability. So this is according to the Bank for International Settlements 2023. Okay, so losses and negative equity do not directly affect the ability of the central bank to achieve its mandate. Indeed, whether we are in normal times or in crisis periods, what we should judge the central bank on is its ability to achieve its mandate.
And here, what's that mandate for those? What's that mandate?
Okay, so the mandate is price stability, i.e., controlling inflation, and promoting the stability of the financial system. So these are the two key mandates of the central bank.
Okay, so let's start from price stability and now begin to look at the lendings to government. That's where a lot of the issues are. And here, let me just break it down to monetary financing, something that you are aware of. What is the impact of monetary financing on price stability?
Okay, so that could lead to inflationary consequences, especially because then you have more money in the economy. And that is part of the challenges we have faced in terms of the fact that the central bank is doing what it's supposed to do in terms of increasing the policy rate to control inflation. But given the fiscal challenges we have had, and they have had to more or less step in and support the government and bail out the economy, that in a way offsets monetary policy, which is not entirely their fault. Okay, the problems we are facing now is more of coming from the fiscal side rather than the monetary side.
Hold on a minute. Let's get the clarification clear here.
Yeah.
Now, you have indicated that monetary financing could create inflationary pressures.
Yes.
So, would I be right to suggest that by financing government, the Bank of Ghana played a role in the high rate of inflation that we're experiencing today?
To a certain extent, but again, we need to put that in context. Remember that we lost access to international capital markets. Okay, so the government could not borrow by, for example, issuing euro bonds. We also downgraded by the major credit rating agents. So more or less, the bank had to step in and function as a lender of last resort. If they hadn't done that, the consequences on the economy could have been very dire. In terms of one, for example, the government not being able to pay salaries. In terms of two, maybe further depreciation in the exchange rate. And that could even lead to political instability and unrest.
Well, but Professor Agbloyor, you as a finance expert, and also based on the literature says there are other avenues. So you can decide to, one, cut down on expenditure, two, increase taxes, three, increase borrowing, even domestically, minus the Bank of Ghana. Is that not the case?
And that is possible, but so again, we need to distinguish between monetary policy and fiscal policy.
Yes, but I'm actually asking a question based on monetary financing, and I'm just trying to, because you've made the point about, being a lender of last resort and where we had found ourselves. I'm just asking, did we not have these avenues also available to us?
So these avenues were options. Of course, they were constrained due to the crisis we were in. But those options are more of fiscal options than options to the central bank.
Sure.
So that's why I want us to distinguish clearly between fiscal policy and monetary policy. Of course, when the central bank starts lending to the government that exceeds the threshold by law, then that of course leads to inflationary pressure. And given the crisis we were in, remember that the Fiscal Responsibility Act was suspended to try to get out of the COVID-19 pandemic.
I would get back to you. I'll get back to you on this particular bit about, the inflationary pressures. This morning we're joined by Professor Elikplimi Agbloyor, who's an associate professor of finance at the University of Ghana Business School. We also have Martin Kpebu in studio with us. So, Martin, you've heard from the professor of finance. And you've done administration and economics. You understand this also. He's made the point that... And the professor, he says, this is a possibility that part of the thing that we are experiencing today is from monetary financing or excessive lending to government. What's your take on it?
So now that, or let's say, since we've always known that is this excessive lending, that caused it, it means that we have to take the consequences as well. So the point is this: you saw that were shut out of the international capital market, right, at the end of 2021. But question is, what happened earlier in 2021? Didn't Bank of Ghana give the government 35 billion? 2021, they gave the government 35 billion. So the point is that once you gave, then be ready for the consequences. Right now, Bank of Ghana is asking for sympathies. No, it can't happen. That's why I keep saying that the question is that at the time you were giving, you didn't know that there will be inflationary pressures.
They said at the time they were giving, if they hadn't stepped in.
It's false. It's false.
We had a problem. You had consistently relied on the international markets. You had obligations to meet. You don't have the money. Now, you had pressures. What do you do?
So you remember economics after economics, Bob Quinn, Tio Achampon, all the others had said it long before 2022 that let's go back to the IMF. Let's go back. So it's the delay in going to the IMF that greatly contributed to this problem. Winston, by the end of 2019, we were debt distressed.
High risk of debt distress.
Yes. We're debt distressed. That's
high risk. We are at high risk of debt distress.
By just manifest. If you read the report, if you use too many words, the thing was crystallizing. That look, you're way beyond, because when the previous administration left, we're 50-something% debt to this GDP ratio, right? Yes, by the end of 2019, it had gone up over 70, right?
Yes.
And so it will show that we're in trouble. And it was just coming as a matter of time. You can't just say, if you say risk, so even if you want to use your word risk, when you see a risk, what do? Do you ignore it?
Tell
Do you ignore? You must take steps to prevent. Yet we kept galloping. No. We want to develop. So we want to do more expansionary budget in 2022, etc. So what we're saying, of course, he's a professor in a university, so there's a limit to which he wants to bash government, right? But the truth is that we saw it coming and we decided to embrace the trouble by not fixing it. We embraced the woes, and that's where Governor Addison contributed to it. That today inflation is so high, people are hungry, people can't pay rent, people can't pay medication, people can't pay school fees. No, Chroma issue, Winston. Chroma issue. So we can't address this in this way. I think Governor Addison has to just go immediately. When he goes, it will restore confidence in the system. He and his two deputies, and Ofuriata, of course. Because
before you get to Ofuriata and governor, the governor has indicated that at the point, he told the finance minister that we exceeded the threshold of 5% of the previous year's revenue. So he was expecting the minister to go and tell Parliament, and he was only coming in to help government function.
And that's also where he got it wrong. Maybe he didn't listen to his lawyers, because Winston is in black and white. Section 30 of Act 918. That's the one that amends the Bank of Ghana Act 612. Section 30, subsection 7, makes it clear that he, the governor, should also report to Parliament. It's not only Ofuriata, the finance minister. No, it's clear. It says, look, the governor should report. Then the finance minister should also report. There's a reason the lawmaker made it. Of course, it's to make sure that I can see that there won't be one person having a monopoly on the information and possibly twisting. That's why it says, governor, go to Parliament. Then it also says, minister for finance, go to Parliament. And it shouldn't be strange. I think somehow when you haven't read around, people haven't read around, you just think, if the finance minister alone goes to Parliament, that's sufficient. Please. That's not the law.
So since you are a lawyer, let me just get this clarification, because there's been an issue that has been raised. So we know that the Act 612 amended into Act 918. But at 612, okay, let me get to the Act 612 bit so we can have the conversation. It ends at 6. Then Act 918 inserts a 7. A subsection 7.
Excellent.
Now, subsection 6 here in Act 612, which still standing, has not been repealed, says, in the event of any emergency, the governor, the minister, and the controller and accountant general shall meet to decide the limit of borrowing that should be made by government, and the minister shall submit a report on the issue to Parliament within 7 sitting days. Then 7, 7 says, where the total of loans, advances, purchases of treasury bills, and securities made under subsection 1 is 5% of the previous year's fiscal revenue, the governor shall notify the minister and Parliament of the attainment of the limit under subsection 2, and the minister, upon notification, shall report to Parliament on the remedial measures to be taken. Now let's break it down. Let's get the understanding. Subsection 6 says the minister, the governor, and the controller and accountant general shall convene a meeting, and decide on the limit of borrowing that should be made by the government, and the minister informs Parliament. Right. The Bank of Ghana says they did this. Now, is this enough? Or the Bank of Ghana governor should then have informed Parliament?
It's not enough. So, meaning the second one, the Bank of Ghana governor, Addison, should have informed Parliament, because that's what subsection 7 says. It says he should also go. And I can see...
Subsection 7 doesn't say he should go. He should go how?
He should go. Please, read it.
Go to Parliament, of course. Okay, yes, that's it.
Yes, so he should also go. And there is a reason for it. You know, the politicians are usually crooks. I always say it, right? Politicians are usually crooks. So there's wisdom. Oh, but that's the corruption. That's the same thing. Politicians are usually crooks.
Suspected, perceived to be.
NDC MP, the same thing. Politicians, no, please, but that's my word, and
Okay,
I'm justified that politicians are crooks, right? So that's why they say you, the technocrat, okay, we try to give you independence under the constitution. You also go and report. So in case the politician has twisted his, yours too will be there. And there's wisdom. This is not the first time that there's something to be done. Then you ask 2 or 3 people or 4 people to report. There is a reason. There is a reason. So the governor can't run away from his breach of the law, and that should constitute grounds for his removal. He has he can be removed like a superior court judge, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what is done. Apart from CJ, the procedure for CJ is different, but the rest of the superior court judges is the same procedure. So maybe somebody should petition that the governor should be removed.
Would you petition?
Yeah, I think I'm interested in petitioning because look, we are suffering. Winston, Kruma issue. Kruma is shit. Winston, don't play with this thing. That's why I came here. That's why I came. Because look, the hunger, the despondency. Oh, Winston, come on. It's just too much. And Addison is just, walking about like, let's say, business as usual. He has to feel it, that he has helped government to throw us into such a deep crater that people are hungry, that people are dying. Go to the hospital. See how many people are dying that because they can't afford medical bills, because they can't pay their bills. You see, KNUST, about 600 students couldn't register because what? They didn't have money to what? Pay. The Kumasi Technical University, mm-hmm. Right? Yes, about 600 students. And most of them, they say they didn't have money to pay school fees. Yet Addison enjoys all the perks. And look, let's revisit this matter. Even as of 2016, when Wampa was governor, there was this case that came out. That even rent alone was about $8,000 for governor. And this is 2023. So I can only imagine that just as their budget has been doubling, by now Addison's rent would have doubled. At the time, you remember that story in 2016 mm-hmm. when Wampa was governor? Yeah, it came out, that rent. So they said it was $8,000. Then another media house came and said, no, it was 6,500 or 7. So I'm saying that the governor's rent alone in Dallas is just unconscionable. So if we've given him everything, we've given them the best, and he couldn't think, he couldn't obey simple laws, and he has contributed to Akufo-Addo and Ofori-Atta putting us in this deep crater, Addison has to take the fall. He has to go. That law is very clear. He didn't report to Parliament, and so he just has to go. We are suffering. So he should also bear it. When he loses some of the perks, of course, because his conditions are basically he may retire with some, but he should go. So he will suffer a diminution. He will suffer a reputational loss. Next time politicians ask him to do that, he will be wiser.
Let me bring Professor Agbloyor in at this point before we go for a short break. Now, Professor Agbloyor, so earlier I was making the point. Yes, we're making, the point about, yes, we know the fiscal, we know the monetary. But mm-hmm. when we got involved in that problem, when we had mm-hmm. to, fall on the Bank of Ghana, when we had hit the 5%, couldn't mm-hmm. we, on a fiscal side, have introduced new measures or the options that I talked about and spared the Bank of Ghana all of these pressures which have impacted our inflation?
Okay, so thank you for the question. I think that could have been that. I think the government tried to do that in some way, even though it was to a certain extent unsuccessful. So, for example, the government tried to introduce the new levy. Probably its design led to they not achieving the revenue targets that they expected. So, yes, options could have been examined and probably implemented better to increase revenue, and also a cut in expenditure. That certainly was an option. Even though when a crisis, I think last year's budget was expansionary in terms of, I think it was about a 23% increase in expenditure compared to the previous year. So certainly, we could have explored options to cut expenditure and also increase revenue. If you permit me, there are a few things that I would like to highlight in terms of a distinction between the solvency and bankruptcy.
Sure, please go ahead.
Of a central bank, and then implications of losses.
Sure.
And then before we wrap up, I can come in with my recommendation. So,
exactly.
Bankruptcy is a legal process, and there are what we call direct costs of bankruptcy and indirect costs of bankruptcy. So the direct costs are the legal expenses, etc. I don't think that the Bank of Ghana can be said to be bankrupt. There are indirect costs of bankruptcy, which for private companies, you, for example, lose your customers. So if people think that you're not going to be there in the future, let's say you are a car, you sell cars like Toyota Ghana, and they don't think you'll be there in the future, then the likelihood that they will deal with you would go down. Okay, but in the case of a central bank, that really is not the case because the commercial banks do not have an option than to keep their deposits to the central bank. So that's bankruptcy. Let me address solvency. Now, an institution is said to be solvent if it's able to meet its obligations.
Yeah.
And looking at the cash flow statement of the Bank of Ghana, as at December 2022, they had about $6 billion in cash. Having studied the cash flow statement, I think that they should be able to meet their obligations.
Okay.
If you want to define insolvency as the liabilities exceeding assets, okay, even in that case, there are some liabilities that the Bank of Ghana is not required to pay. So, for example, the currency in circulation, which is a large amount. Okay, so I don't think that technically the Bank of Ghana is insolvent. Of course, when you make profits, it's very good for you because you can use them to pay the government in terms of dividends, and also it improves the reputation of the central bank. But for a central bank, making profits is not of first importance. Achieving its mandate is of first importance. Even if you look at commercial banks as well, profitability is important, but liquidity is even more important. So you can have a profitable bank that is not liquid, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But that bank, profitable bank that is not liquid, that bank would not survive.
Sure.
Okay, it can very easily collapse. But you can have an unprofitable bank operating for years, 5, 10 years. So far as it has sufficient liquidity to pay its obligations, it can continue to be in existence. So that's the implication of solvency and bankruptcy. And like I mentioned, the Bank of Ghana cannot be defined as being insolvent or bankrupt.
All right.
But the losses have serious implications. So, for example, we are all talking about Bank of Ghana today because of the losses. And that invites more scrutiny in terms of the affairs of the central bank. Of course, most of the losses were due to the domestic debt exchange program. Also, it can affect the independence of the central bank. Let me explain.
Go ahead.
So, given the losses that have occurred, I think that the government would need to recapitalize the central bank. I read the central bank issued a press statement, frequently asked questions, and they did mention that they expect to return to positive equity within the next 5 years, with options including a recapitalization by the government. So I feel that they need to provide more details in terms of how they intend to return to positive equity. I think that the government needs to plan to recapitalize the central bank in terms of budgeting to give some allocation to the central bank, possibly annually. Now, losses could also have macroeconomic effects because, in essence, they are expansionary in nature. And to withdraw liquidity from the economy, the central bank would have to increase interest rates. That will make the cost of lending higher, or cost of borrowing for businesses higher, and that could ultimately hurt economic growth. Having said this, we know that globally a number of central banks have reported losses, such as the Australian Central Bank, the New Zealand Central Bank, etc. Their situation is a bit different. I could try to explain how their losses occurred. So, they, during COVID-19, printed new money to buy assets. That is called quantitative easing. It's an unconventional monetary policy.
Yeah.
So the central bank prints money to purchase assets like bonds. When they buy these bonds, the prices of the bonds are going to increase, and that leads to a fall in interest rates, which makes borrowing cheaper. Businesses can borrow, and that can kickstart the economy. Okay, so that is what we call quantitative easing. But when you unwind quantitative easing, the central bank can most likely incur a loss. How does that occur? When you are going to unwind quantitative easing, it's usually done when the economy is recovering. And when the economy is recovering, interest rates begin to increase again. And there's an inverse relationship between bond prices and interest rates. So when the economy is recovering, bond prices are likely to fall. And at the time that the central bank is selling the bonds, the prices are likely to be lower. So if you remember, when we're buying, prices were higher. When they are selling, prices are lower. So a lot of central banks in developed countries have incurred losses due to quantitative easing. And in some countries, the governments have actually guaranteed that they would reimburse these central banks due to these losses. So these losses were important to more or less revive their economies.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Stay with me. Stay with me. I'll get back. We'll look at, the recommendations, but also look at, now that we know, you've indicated the role the Bank of Ghana has also played through its monetary financing, whether the consistent increases in the policy rate is the way to go. This is the Super Morning Show. This morning we're joined by Martin Kpebu, who is a private legal practitioner, and Professor Elikplimi Agbloyor, who is an associate professor of finance at the University of Ghana Business School. So let's get back to the conversation. Let me wrap it up with Professor Agbloyor, then I'll get to you in studio, Martin Kpebu. So, Professor Agbloyor.
I'm still here.
Yes, great. Yeah. So let's get your recommendations first, then I'll ask a few of my questions. What should be done now?
Okay, so number one, I think that the government should try to abide by the IMF program, even as we enter an election year in 2024. And the government should take a second look at its flagship programs and enhance fiscal consolidation. So that's number one. Number two, I think that the 10 billion capital by the central bank is a bit on the low side. We need to increase that. The question is to what level. If you want to, even though it's not a commercial bank, but if you want to take 10% of the assets of the central bank, for a commercial bank, it's 10% of their risk-weighted assets. Okay, so 10% of the bank's assets as at 2022, that's about 11.8 billion. Okay, maybe we should be looking at something at that level. Again, there's a concept called value at risk, which says that you should hold enough capital such that even when you make losses, it doesn't have a big hit on you. Given a 50 billion loss, maybe we should be even looking at capital levels higher than 11 billion. Further, I think that what has happened provides us with a good opportunity to look at our laws, to see how we deal with future losses incurred by the central bank, so that the rules are specified way in advance, and all parties can respect the rules when something like this happens.
Okay.
Also, just a few more, I'll conclude shortly. Maybe we may need to get additional expertise for the central bank. Our central bank is a professional central bank. They know what they are doing, but sometimes external expertise can also help. Let me cite an example. The Bank of England recently engaged Ben Bernanke, who was, I think, last year's Nobel Prize winner in economics, to help them review their models and also their operations, particularly because their forecasting models didn't work very well, given the shocks that hit their economy. Also, we want to protect the independence of the central bank. And here I'll be a bit careful. There was pressure on Dr. Nashiru Isaku to resign in 2017 when the MPP took over. I think that was wrong. That compromises the independence of your central bank. So I think that we should allow our governance and board to complete their terms, unless there are very serious circumstances in which we feel that they should be removed. Of course, if you want to remove them, I believe there are processes in the law to do so. Maybe Martin and the lawyers would be better placed to speak to that. But in my view, I think they should be allowed to complete their term, and the next appointing authority can appoint new governors and a board. In terms of central bank independence, I'll give you some numbers. So if you look at Africa, the big economies, Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, we do well in terms of central bank independence, the overall score. So this data is for Romeli 2022. So we do well in terms of central bank independence. Where we perform poorly, if you look at the data, is central bank lending independence. Yeah. And I believe that has contributed to some of the issues we are seeing now. So we need to strengthen the processes in place to secure the bank's independence in terms of lending to the government. And then also where we also don't do very well is the central bank board independence in terms of the appointments. So we want to look at that as well so that we can improve the overall independence of our central bank. Thank you. So those are my recommendations.
Great, but the bit about the inflation bit, and there are some of, speaking to some of the economists, there are those who have actually talked about the fact that yes, you can increase policy rate, but you just don't increase policy rate. I mean, you do that also checking at the health of your economy and also looking at what is driving your inflation and correcting it. So here we find ourselves, central bank has played a role, central bank lending or monetary financing has played a role. We also do know that in a lot of the issues we're lacking in the supply areas is not more of a demand thing, and we are consistently increasing policy rate. Professor Agbloyor, how do we deal with that?
Okay, so if we look at the data and the central bank's track record, especially when we implemented inflation targeting, you will see that inflation and the policy rates tend to move closely together. So that suggests that to some extent or to a large extent, monetary policy has been effective. There's a research that I discussed with one of my co-authors, Dr. Dennis Safwa. He's based in the U.S. And based on his research, what he has seen is that a lot of the inflationary pressures we experience in Ghana, they are due to exogenous or external shocks.
Exactly.
So we probably want to diversify our economy better, reduce our reliance on imports. Okay, and if we're able to restructure the economy, that will improve the efficacy of monetary policy.
Anyway, thank you very much, Professor Elikplimi Agbloyor, for joining us this morning. We're grateful that you made time to join us. Professor Agbloyor, it's an associate professor of finance at the University of Ghana Business School. So, Martin, you've been told, you know what has happened. The Bank of Ghana, the monetary financing, has contributed to where we are today by way of inflation and by way of monetary policy, which by extension has affected lending rates, that today the businesses are complaining. The question is, where do we move from here finally?
Good. Yeah, so it starts with people who have committed breaches of the law, people who have committed crimes, being held accountable. Accountability first. So you see Section 67 of the law says that a breach of the law would attract a penalty of 500 penalty units or 2 years imprisonment. The Bank of Ghana Act.
As the Act 612?
612. You have Section 67.
Section 67. Let me just get that one so that we
as you read it too, as Professor mentioned, but I want us to see this. Isn't it in the Section 32 that the Bank of Ghana is advisor to government on fiscal matters? So, and it goes on to say that the bank shall advise government on A, the monetary transactions of the government and government agencies, and B, the international and local contracts to which the government is a party and which relate to the object and functions of the bank. So he said you are advisor to government on fiscal matters, unless, I don't think in the 918 it's been repealed. So this then that Bank of Ghana is only doing monetary policy, it has no business in fiscal matters. I don't get it. The law says advisor to government on fiscal matters. So let's go to the 67.
Oh, yes,
where
it's stated here. It says that, except as otherwise provided in this Act, a person who contravenes the provision of this Act, regulation made under this Act, or anything prescribed or direction made or given under this Act and published in the Gazette, or knowingly makes an incorrect statement in the document submitted by that person or an incorrect reply to a question asked of that person for the purpose of this Act commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding 500 penalty units or to imprisonment for not exceeding 2 years, or to both.
Great. So, Governor Addison, that's the law we've read to you. That's what you're faced with. It didn't report to the Parliament when the 5% threshold was met. And so you have to face the consequences for it. So he has to resign first, and then we'll look at the criminal implications. Yes, that's how it starts, because he's enjoyed. Winston, the perks, the pay, salary, everything the governor is enjoyed. If these easy things he couldn't do, he has to suffer for it. Then, as you said, where do we go? Winston, let's also look at Article 184 about this and the Bank of Ghana's activities. I think that we need to activate 184 well. You see, 184 is saying that the committee in Parliament should monitor the emphasis on monitor the receipts and payments. Then the central bank should report at the end of 6 months. The two are different. He said they should monitor. So, and I think we've been misreading it and just saying every 6 months, then Bank of Ghana will just report on receipts and payment. It's wrong. Let's read it. It says, the Committee of Parliament responsible for financial measures shall monitor the foreign exchange receipts and payments or transfers of the Bank of Ghana in and outside of Ghana, and shall report on them to Parliament once in every 6 months. So it means that Parliament has to be given real-time access. It says monitor. Look, the context, this is in a constitution. It's not any private business. And what's the constitution seeking to do? Better governance. Adongo and the rest of the parliamentarians say that they invite Addison, he's always running away. They invite Addison today, tomorrow, kukwasa, sa, till the horses have bolted. Please, Article 184, we want it being implemented to the letter. It says monitor, so it means that real time. Don't you hear, you tune into foreign news, Jerome Powell goes to Congress, he testifies, they ask questions, they do this. You know, a lot, and there's transparency. But here, we shroud everything in secrecy and then say report every 6 months when the horses have bolted. No, so we are calling on Parliament to also assert itself. The thing says they should monitor. The meaning of monitor is that it means that critical to monitoring means that as soon as the thing happens, you should be there to check. Is everything okay? Real time. Otherwise, if you sit down in 6 months when the central bank could have given government billions of Ghana cedis and then inflation is high, what can you do when the horses have bolted? What can you do?
What can you do? Thank you very much, Martin Kpebu.